Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God."
God's story hasn't come to an end just yet, and we know that. God created the world to be perfect and to enjoy a perfect relationship with him. Yet we know that the world is far from perfect. Jesus, the Messiah, the promised King, came and conquered sin and death and made a way for us to enjoy that relationship with God. He told us that the kingdom of heaven, that perfect, just, righteous, good kingdom of the Messiah, was near. But as we look at the world around us, as we see what happens on the news day by day, that kingdom has not yet arrived in its fullness. There's a Bible scholar named Tom Wright who describes this as a phenomenon whereby we're living in an overlap of the ages. Through Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, the world really did become a different place. The Messiah, the promised King, has come, and his kingdom has been launched. But that doesn't mean that everything changes or is brought to a conclusion overnight. It does, however, give us a picture of where the story is going in its completeness. Justice, rightness, goodness. The end of this story is still unfolding. And the church has an important part to play in that. Remember that Jesus had commissioned his followers to go out into the world and tell people about him, to teach people how to live kingdom lives, to create little kingdom communities, pockets of God's kingdom all around the world. People and places that pursue justice and rightness and goodness. Through the church, we're a part of God's new movement through which the world has been changed and will continue to be changed. It doesn't always work out. Remember that one of the key messages from God's story is that we as human beings will often use our will to turn away from God. Not to follow him, but instead to go in completely the wrong direction. So the church gets it wrong all the time. We're broken, fallen human beings. But nonetheless, we're called to tell people about and work for and towards that just and right and good kingdom. The final book of the Bible is called Revelation. It was written by one of Jesus' followers named John, but it's the very first words of it that tell us that this message was given to John by Jesus. This is Jesus' message. It starts not unlike some of the other books of the New Testament with a series of different letters written to churches. Jesus has important things to say to some of the different communities of his followers all around the ancient world, and those messages remain relevant to the church today. Then the focus shifts in Revelation, and John shares with us a vision that he's been given of a time yet to come. After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." When we looked at the first book of the Bible, Genesis, we talked about how there were still lots of things about it that we didn't understand, things that we'd still have questions about, and Revelation is no different. There's all sorts of imagery used that can be hard for us to make sense of. Disasters, famine, angels, scrolls, dragons, battles. As we work through all of that imagery, though, the conclusion of God's story starts to come into focus. Jesus, the central character of God's story, the Messiah, the Christ, the promised chosen King, the one who has already come and defeated sin and death and set the coming of his kingdom into motion. Jesus will come again to usher that kingdom into its completeness and fullness. There's a beautiful symmetry to God's word. There are only 4 chapters in God's story, the Bible, where everything is perfect, just as God intended it to be. The first 2 chapters, Genesis 1 and 2, and the last 2 chapters, Revelation 21 and 22. God's perfect story comes back to the way it was always supposed to be, a perfect creation and a perfect relationship between God and his creation. Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. The end of the story is still unfolding, but this is its incredible trajectory. A new creation, evil removed, the world transformed, all things remade, or perfect God and his perfect creation brought together once more.